Hi, Dominique. Thanks for coming and speaking with us today. Obviously, a lot to talk about for next week in particular with the Fed meeting. I'm just going to ask if it would be possible for you to just sort of give us a quick rundown through some of last week's data first, just sort of set the scene, I suppose, as we get into this important meeting.
Sure. Last week was mainly the retail sales, and it was quite good actually. The control group that the BEA uses to build its estimate of consumption in the GDP data, the control group aggregate was up 0.6% month on month, which taking into account the low inflation we have at the moment, is actually a very strong number.
Was there a sort of single driver behind that, or was it kind of a more generic strength?
It was quite broad-based.
Oh, excellent. So definitely helps your view in terms of that's something that the Fed will be taking notice of this week then.
I'm not so sure. The Fed loves the Goldilocks macro backdrop, so strong growth, stable inflation, as much as market participants. I mean, for the Fed, they see this Goldilocks as a sign that a soft landing is the most likely scenario. And so far, they have ignored signs of strong growth. They've noted it, obviously. Growth has been stronger than what they expected, but it's not led them to change their policy, and in particular, their policy rules. They now have what I would call a calendar-based policy rule, where, before they were hiking every meeting. Now they want to hike every other meeting. I think they want to hike more slowly, which I interpret as meaning they will hike every other meeting. So next week, and then probably November.
Oh, excellent. And you've written, because Dominique's for all of our sort of listeners, she's put out an excellent preview for the Fed. So please do read that. But one of the things you sort of pointed towards is getting a better understanding on their reaction function. Would you be able to sort of give a little bit more information on that and what you're going to be looking out for on that front?
So, I mean, this meeting is shaping up to be a bit boring, right? Because we already know it's 25 basis points. There is no SCP. And we also know that Chair Powell is going to tell us that every meeting is decided based on the information available. So he's not going to give any pointers on September. But still, we might get some clarity, or a bit more clarity than we had before, on the reaction function, in the sense that it's clear if inflation is higher or lower than the Fed expects in the SCP. So to be very specific, if inflation is above 3.9%, which the Fed expects at the end of this year, and going to 2.6% at the end of next year, if it looks to be higher, the Fed, I think, will hike more. If it looks to be lower, the Fed may cut more than they are currently projecting. So that part of the reaction function is fairly clear. The more difficult part is how they will react to stronger growth than they expect. And so far, the reaction has been very limited because we've had this unusual combination of faster growth and slower inflation, or somewhat slower inflation. So we might get a sense of how the Fed looks at it, especially Chair Powell. On the one hand, the Doves think that the combination of high growth and slow inflation reflects that most of the policy tightening has yet to come through to the real economy, while the Hawks think this combination reflects that the Fed has not tightened enough. And obviously, the longer the Fed waits and inflation and growth remains strong, the more difficult it is to make the argument that monetary tightening has yet to filter through. I'm not sure we will get something decisive this meeting, but there will be questions, and hopefully we will get some clues. So far, Powell has sided with the doves, but let's see. Perhaps it is going to give us a bit more clarity on his thinking. Who knows?
Absolutely. Well, we'll be all listening out for it. On your point around this sort of Goldilocks scenario where inflation's coming down whilst growth is relatively strong, is there a sort of single driver? Is it just a few sectors, or the used cars and the shelter sort of area that's driving the inflation decline?
No, I mean I think the main explanation is negative energy price shock. So a big decline in energy prices, which lowers cost all over, including wage cost, but boost household incomes. They spend in the US, the average household spends about 5% of its income on energy. So a 15% year-on-year decline in energy prices actually is a significant boost to income. So I think this is a main driver, and as long as energy prices, do not rise too far and too fast, the Fed is in a bad situation, and so are the markets, frankly.
And is there a basic effect, sort of point at which that will start to fall away in the disinflation or deflation on the energy side? Or
so the Fed tends not to look at base effect. They tend to look at long-term drivers of inflation, of which base effects are not. They tend to be very focused on month-on-month.
Okay, no, interesting.
Inflation.
And we will be this week, at the end of this week, getting the PCE outturns. Is there anything that you sort of expect to see from that, or that people should be sort of paying attention to that we might not have seen in the CPI, or any details to be aware of?
Not really. We're going to have the same thing, stable month-on-month rents, low core goods, and low hypercore inflation.
No, sure thing. And then just back to the Fed. One of the things that we get asked a lot, and has been sort of a theme more recently from clients, is just trying to understand exactly why so many cuts are being priced into 2024 right now for the Fed, why it's gone so much beyond the SEP, given the strength, etc. It does seem quite perplexing from a sort of fundamental perspective, as you've kind of sort of consistently cover. Is there anything that we might be getting this week from either the Fed or in the weeks ahead on the data side that might kind of see a bit of movement on that front, or?
Not really. I think the basis for the cuts is basically the cuts priced in by the market, is the Fed itself anticipating that it will cut the Fed funds rate by 100 basis points. And when asked why that is, Chair Powell said that's because they expect inflation to go down by 130 basis points over the next year. And therefore, if they did not cut, they would actually be increasing the real Fed funds, which is interesting in itself, because it shows that the Fed is looking at the real Fed funds as measured with a spot inflation rather than a break-even. And it also makes you wonder why they left the real Fed funds negative for such a long time. But anyway, so since we don't have a SCP, I'm not expecting much more clarity on those cuts. But for sure, Chair Powell is going to get asked.
Yeah, no, that's great to hear. And it is sort of always great to have very in-depth insights from yourself on these kind of things, where it's so important, but it's hard to get your head around sometimes. So is there anything else of note that you're sort of paying attention in the week?
We have a slew of data. So I think the more important ones are going to be the ECI, the Employment Cost Index. it's a Fed preferred measure of wage inflation because it adjusts calculations for changes in the distribution of employment. So it's almost like a median wage. It's close to the median wage published by the Atlanta Fed, and we're going to see a small sequential decline, and I agree. Then we have the GDP, which, I mean, it's always stale, but it's still important because it's a basis for everything else. And I think we're going to have a surprise here. The Atlanta Fed nowcast is at 2.4%, the consensus 1.8%. I personally have more faith in the Atlanta Fed than in the consensus. I'm expecting the GDP to show a positive contribution of residential real estate investment. I'll be looking at a slowdown in consumption because there was an absurdly large increase in car purchases in Q1 that boosted consumption. So I think we're going to see a slowdown there. Other data that is important is a monthly, so the June personal income and spending data. And there, as always, I'm looking for an increase in the savings rate, but a limited one, as a sign that the excess savings accumulated during the pandemic are being spent. The other data that's interesting in there is spending on durable goods because it reflects household expectations of future income. So I find it much more reliable than consumer surveys that have become very noisy and reflect all kinds of biases. And we will get more data on the residential real estate market again. That's going to point at a recovery. But perhaps a more important event of the week will not be the data, but actually the negotiations between UPS unions and management. The current collective agreement expires at the end of the month. And so if there is no agreement, there will be a strike involving as many workers as 340,000. This will be the largest strike by number of workers in US history. And it's really going to blow, raise cost because UPS is 40% of the US parcel market. And also competitors of UPS cannot pick up the slack. So this could be an extremely disruptive strike. And it could turn out that, it's like the canary in the coal mine, considering how tight the labor market is. And the recent decline in real wages, there could be many more strikes coming after this one. So we'll see. But this is something I'm watching very closely.
So just as a quick question on that, are you seeing that more as a potential cost pressure in terms of the effect on, I suppose, inflation of, I guess, delivery costs spiking because other companies have to take it or having to pay premiums, or more as the potential for, as you say, employees to use collective action to sort of drive wages up and therefore sort of feed into inflation that way?
Both. As you explained, it's going to be like a negative supply shock. Suddenly it's more difficult and costly to ship your stuff around. And also, if it turns out, to be a sort of a canary in the coal mine, a harbinger of more industrial action to come, it's going to translate into faster wage growth. So this is one little dissonance that could spoil the Fed perfect summer.
Oh, excellent. That's a very good, very negative, but more interesting sort of tone to finish on. Well, thank you so much for that, Dom. It's been really insightful. Always very much enjoy speaking with you and hearing all your thoughts. And just for all our listeners and watchers who are not yet aware, which they should be, Dom puts out some excellent pieces every week. She's got a particularly good one on the Fed, previewing the Fed, running through all our thoughts that we sort of discussed today. So please do check that out. Please also do check out my own stuff. I've put out some stuff on UK inflation this week. We had an interesting reading there, and a little deep dive into why UK inflation is overshot versus Europe, and why it's not the Bank of England's fault necessarily. And we've also got a couple of other pieces. So we've got Richard's Weekly, which is looking at the US and USTs, US dollars and USTs, and also our Commodity Weekly from Varesh, which is all about understanding the SPR. So lots and lots of stuff to read. So please do join us on our website. And thank you so much again, and have a great week.
Thank you, Henry.